Hello there. This is a presentation of Medica. It's a very vast subject and you have to understand the gist of the medicine, the essence of the medicine. My presentation of Medica, whenever I lecture on this subject in any part of the world, I like to present it in a picturized way so that it goes in your mind and you frame a picture. I give a lot of emphasis on the old proving, the proving of Hahnemann, proving of the old masters. And I tend to combine the old proving with the modern Medica as well. And here is a short presentation of calcarea phos. Many times I also use calcarea phos as in a calcarea constitution phosphorus symptom or vice versa. But calcarea phos in itself has wonderful symptomatology. So let me take you through a pictorial presentation of calcarea phos. This is the appearance of calcarea. I give a lot of emphasis on look and diagnose, how the patient appears before you, how he works, how he talks, how he speaks to you, his attitude, etc. So we have a tall, thin person. Sometimes we call it a lanky constitution, flat chest, and which you can see over here, especially in the growing years. Here we have the gait, which is the staggering gait of calc phos. When the patient walks in your consulting room, I always watch how he's walking in, and that's important. Here is the nail. If you look in my miasm presentation, I mentioned glossy nails are tubercular. In my book, I give a lot of emphasis on that. And your calcarea phos is a tubercular miasm. So you have glossy nails and you have spots on the nails, and that's calcarea phos, which is a tubercular nail. Here is the sleep position in a baby, which we call a genupectoral position, knees and face forced into the pillow. So many times I ask the parent how the baby sleeps, and many times that gives an unadulterated picture of the medicine. Here in calcarea phos, one of the weakest link, I give a lot of emphasis where the chain breaks. I generally put 3 areas as the weakest link in the medicine, and in calcarea phos, tooth is one of the weakest area, abdomen is one of the weakest area, mind is one of the weakest area. Schussler makes it is one of our preeminently teething medicine, and you could see there are various type of teething problems in calc phos. We have the delayed milestones because of the calcium and phosphate deficiency. So as a consequence of the delayed milestones, you have the sutures open, and especially the posterior fontanalis. But in these days we find the emaciated constitution, delayed milestones, especially delayed teething, and that's important in calcarea phos. You could see the tooth decay as soon as they appear, and that's important for calcarea phos. I have here the anemic children, thumb sucking. So once again, look and diagnose. Sucking the thumb always wants to go somewhere. That's a vagabond attitude, changeable attitude of calcarea phos because it's a tubercular miasm. So understanding the miasm through Medica or miasmatic Medica is the way I present. You could see over here is the school-going children headache, and that's one of the very interesting area. Obviously in the background the totality have to be there. This is very, very important. In the modern time, dear friends, we see broken families. So think of a family where suddenly the parents separated. Here my calcarea phos is the child. So child thinks the parents separated and they don't love me. So there is a grief. And here in this, on the left hand side, you find the mental etiology where you see unhappiness, you see grief, and as a consequence of that, we have the manifestation. The manifestation on 3 things I will give emphasis: lack of focus and lack of direction, number 2, vagabond, and number 3, reckless. So what I'm saying, as a consequence of the divorce, as a consequence of the separation of the parent, this child, she was a pulsatilla child, she was a pulsatilla girl, she was a pulsatilla boy, she was very happy. And now as a consequence of that grief, she lost all the motivation, lack of focus, lack of direction, reckless. She leaves home, doesn't come back till 10, 11 at night. She started drinking. She started smoking marijuana, and they are better by stimulation, which is a calcaria phos symptom. So on the one hand, grief, and the manifestation on the other hand is manifested as lack of focus, lack of direction, recklessness, changeability, vagabond, and that's very, very interesting, discontentment and bored, which I will take you through pictures. We have this here. This is the reckless vagabond attitude of calcaria phos. Two young boys climbing over the walls, and that's the recklessness of calc phos. Here you could see that a grief stricken on the background, and the manifested as lack of focus, lack of direction, loss of motivation, so they don't know what to do, and many times they do a lot of vandalism. Here on the top picture, the vandalism, what he is doing, he is puncturing the new boyfriend of mom, so who has parked his car outside in the drive, and he's puncturing that, and that's interesting. It's a typical calc phos behavior. Here the discontentment of calc phos that I like to share with you, stubbornness of calc phos, discontentment, stubborn, these are all tubercular behavior, and that's your interesting aspect of calc phos. Here we are passing on to the dissatisfaction in these two pictures. You could see the dissatisfaction is manifested, may change his appointment if it is an adult, because of the changeability in the mind, may change his appointment time many times, and that's your calc phos as well. Look at this, the fearlessness of calc phos. The fearless face on the one hand, and on the other hand, they are very sharp and intelligent, and that sharp and intelligence comes from phosphorus, whereas the fearlessness is the destruction of fear of the miasm, which comes from destruction is syphilis, and so Psora and syphilis joins here the tubercular miasm. Loss of motivation I have mentioned, better by stimulation, and here the stimulation could be the drink, the stimulation could be, as I said, marijuana, etc. Here there are several pictures showing the recklessness aspect of the calcaria phos as a consequence of grief, as a consequence of disappointment of love. Here the disappointment of love is the disappointment of love from her or his parents, and as a consequence of that, the manifestation is fearlessness, recklessness, vagabond, and lack of focus, lack of direction, which I'm trying to share here in calc phos. This picture once again relates to lack of focus, lack of motivation. He doesn't go to school, hang around here and there, a lot of vandalism, and that's your calcaria phos. We have the rebellious aspect, with the rebellion against parents. I like to do this because you don't love me, so let me do this, and that's the rebellious aspect, the recklessness of calc phos. This is young boy jumping into the pond or jumping into the river, and that's the recklessness of calc phos. Here you see the aggression of calcaria phos. This aggression comes from the boredom. This aggression comes from the discontentment. On the background, as I mentioned, that there is grief, there is disappointment. As a consequence of that, the manifestation, we have sometimes the discontentment, the boredom manifested with aggression. Here in this picture, the bored and dissatisfaction is manifested. Bored and dissatisfaction, especially dissatisfaction, if you remember, I mentioned at the tubercular miasm, and this tubercular miasm is manifested in calcaria phos. So dissatisfaction, once again, manifested with lack of focus, lack of motivation, and that's important. Dear friends, grief-stricken. As a consequence of that, you could see they're heartbroken. They could be indifferent, and that's interesting. And that's a wonderful way of looking at calc phos. On the background, the etiology and the manifestation are these. This is the communication. There could be lack of communication or over-communicative. Over-communicative comes from phosphorus, which I'm showing in this picture as well. Company ameliorates, we find that in calc phos, which comes from phosphorus, and that's interesting. And this is the discontentment and stubbornness of calc phos. The discontented aspect, as I mentioned before, which comes from the background of the grief, which comes from the background of the disappointment, and they totally get discontented. The whole life gets changed. A beautiful pulsatilla, a beautiful phosphorus change into calcaria phos, reckless, rebellious, discontented. And that's my presentation of Calphos, which is a wonderful, wonderful deep-acting polycrest. Thank you. Hello there. This is a short presentation of carcinosin, how I teach carcinosin. I can spend days on teaching carcinosin. It's such a big subject. It's such a big medicine. I will never, I repeat, never prescribe carcinosin if I do not have mental symptoms. So let us take you a very short pictorial presentation of carcinosin. The appearance, the cafe au lait appearance with dark moles and sclerotics. And that's how Dr. Forbister described this carcinosin. In carcinosin, we have nap ameliorates like we have it in Nux vomica. So the patient is overtired and a short nap makes him better. But this is a very, very important aspect of carcinosin, and I want you to really understand this. On the left hand side, I have the etiology. On the right hand side, I have the psychic manifestation. Prolonged history of unhappiness, prolonged history of irritability, prolonged history of fear, fright. And these all in the background. And when I say prolonged history, at least for a period of 12 to 18 months plus. As a consequence of that, the manifestation on the 3 points I give lot of emphasis. On the one hand, they can be very suppressive. They do not share their behavior. They do not share their feelings. They keep everything inside. The second aspect, they could be very soft and sensitive. And the third aspect, they could be unfulfilled and they could be rebellious. So if you look on the left hand side of this presentation, I have mentioned about the prolonged history of fear and fright. The fright, it could be in a child. The next door neighbor is to sexual molestation, history of sexual molestation by the next door neighbor, and that's the fear. Anytime there is a knock on the door, fear and fright, prolonged history. So, unhappy childhood. On the background, suppressed anger. It could be an adult working in an environment where it is very, very difficult to work because the boss is very dominating. He flings the file on her nose, but she suppresses the anger and she has to pay her bills, so she works. So suppressed anger in the background, unhappiness in the background, and these are in the background. Also, there is pressure to perform. In this modern world, this pressure to perform as a consequence of that unhappiness in the background. And that's the etiology on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, I mentioned about the manifestation. One thing I like to mention over here, my friends, I always relate carcinosin because it is prepared from cancer cells. So, cancer, what is the body's nature or way the body behaves to a cancer? Body try to localize it. Say there is a cancer here and body try to localize it over there. Finally, the body tries to throw the unimportant organs and save the vital organs. I like to correlate that to the carcinosin behavior. Carcinosin like to also hide their suffering, hide their grief. They're the doormat. So they hide their grief, but they like to keep the smile to the family. And that's the interesting aspect. They try to localize their grief in one corner of their heart and have a big smile for the family and show everything is fine. And that's the way they behave. And let me take through some of the pictures of this. They can be very romantic. They can be very soft and sensitive, having candlelight dinner. But on the background, they have a lot of suppression of suffering. And that's interesting. Unhappiness is in the background, which I have already mentioned. Here you see the interesting aspect. It goes in a cycle. I always present that a carcinosin lifestyle goes in a cycle. They can be very affectionate. They can be very family oriented. But they can be oppressive and obstinate and suppressive and rebellious. When they are pushed to the limit, they burst open. And that's the rebellious aspect of carcinosin. The two aspects I present it as a 3D, destructive, disobedient, and disapproves authoritarian control. And on the other hand, sensitive, soft, and sympathetic carcinosin. The two aspects of carcinosin, and that's quite an interesting way of looking at it. I have the nature, they are the fastidious carcinosin, and also the carcinosin can be very soft and romantic, which I have mentioned before. Here in the background, the unhappy childhood is very, very important. Here, In the bottom picture, that girl is my carcinosin patient later on in her life, but she recalls as in childhood, the father was alcoholic, father used to come late and physically assault her mom, and that's the background in her mind, which is the unhappy childhood in the background, resulting gradually various type of problems in the adulthood. Carcinosin is a medicine of choice in those cases as well. Changeability of carcinosin. On the left hand side of this picture, you see that she's doing vandalism. On the right hand side of the picture, she's having a candlelight dinner. And that changeability of carcinosin is important as well, and that's interesting. This is my short presentation, as I like to share the other aspect of carcinosin, which is the rhythmic aspect. They love music and they appreciate the rhythm. So this carcinosin person is looking that, in the restaurant, they are playing music and he is appreciating that. That's my short presentation of carcinosin to share with you how I present this big nosodes and polycrest. Thank you very much.